Coming up, the recent record of the NIH and the origin of COVID-19. Welcome to Just Facts News, where we bring you thoroughly vetted facts that other newscasts have ignored or distorted. In a recent episode of 60 Minutes, host Sharon Alfonsi skewered the Trump administration for cutting the budget of the National Institutes of Health. She began by interviewing Dr. Francis Collins, a former director of the agency, who said that
deaths from heart disease are down by 75% in the last 40 years. That's NIH. Deaths from stroke are down about 75%. That's NIH.
Here's what 60 Minutes failed to tell you, even though the program's top reporter, Scott Pelly, claims that they fact-check every story. Virtually none of that progress occurred under Collins' recent 12-year tenure as director of the NIH from 2009 to 2021. Furthermore, a paper about early improvements makes clear that the potential causes are wide-ranging and based on modeling studies that have great imprecision and must be interpreted cautiously. In other words, NIH might not be the primary cause. 60 Minutes also reported
a Journal of the American Medical Association study found that between 2010 and 2019, 99% of FDA-approved drugs had ties to research funded by the NIH.
Here's more of what 60 Minutes didn't tell you. The study actually found that NIH has made limited contributions to the clinical development of new drugs approved by the FDA. How limited? About 10% of estimated industry spending on clinical trials. The study notes that most NIH funding of drug research occurs in the preclinical phase, but it doesn't provide any facts about the efficacy of such research. However, a study published by the journal Nature in 2012 does. In this study, scientists tried to reproduce the findings of 53 landmark peer-reviewed preclinical studies used for the development of cancer drugs. After extensive experiments, they were unable to reproduce 89% of the results. The paper summarizes the implications of these findings by declaring, although hundreds of thousands of research papers are published annually, too few clinical successes had been produced given the public investment of significant financial resources. In other words, NIH and other government agencies that fund this kind of research might not be making efficient or effective use of taxpayers' money. Alfonsi also reported that the NIH spends 80% of its $47 billion budget on grants to outside researchers and then broadcast Collins stating this.
Most of that goes out to the universities and institutes all over the country. They're the ones that do the work, but they get the funds from NIH by writing very compelling grant applications that go through the most rigorous peer review system in the world.
Here's more of what 60 Minutes failed to tell you. The NIH has recently issued grants for a study of social networks among Black and Latino sexual minority men in New Jersey, studying structural racism and discrimination against older gay men of color, an LGBT+ inclusive teen pregnancy prevention program for our transgender boys, and studying the sexual health of LGBTQ+ Latinx youth in an agricultural community. Most significantly, the NIH gave $1.4 million to the Wuhan Institute of Virology via a group called EcoHealth Alliance. As documented by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, some of this money was used to fund genetic experiments to combine naturally occurring bat coronaviruses with SARS viruses to produce hybridized coronavirus strains. Moreover, the research to generate these findings was not subject to a gain-of-function research funding pause. Furthermore, the Wuhan lab conducted a limited experiment to test whether the spike protein from naturally occurring bat coronaviruses could bind to the human ACE2 receptor, which is exactly what the SARS-CoV-2 virus does, the virus responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic. The NIH alleges that this research could not have been the source of the pandemic because NIH analyzed the experiments and concluded that the naturally occurring bat coronaviruses were genetically distant from SARS-CoV-2. However, the NIH's claim is refuted by a study published by the journal Nature in 2022, which found that SARS-CoV-2 progenitor bat viruses genetically close to SARS-CoV-2 circulate in cave bats living in northern Laos. And in 2021, The Intercept released grant documents for EcoHealth Alliance to fund research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology involving experimental work to understand the ability of bat coronaviruses to bind to human receptors with bats from multiple locations, including Laos. To borrow Colin's words that were uncritically aired by 60 Minutes, that's NIH. Thank you for joining us. Tune in next time for more thoroughly vetted facts that other newscasts ignore or distort.